Right, morning, welcome all. So we're talking about how do we relate to people who are different to us. So I was thinking about that topic this morning, and I thought, well, it's a little bit of an odd topic, isn't it? Because everybody's unique, so therefore we're all different. So and we relate to people all the time. So how do we relate to people who are different to us? Well, yeah, I think it's just part of the intrinsic way that we operate. But maybe there's a bit more of a deeper meaning in that. So it's interesting. I mean, the three of us here this morning are completely different, although Ed and I have English as a first language. Jasper's first language is Afrikaans. We're all three, let's call us middle-aged white males. just because Jasper's getting younger. So what are the differences and how do we relate? Yeah, Ed, what did your dictionary say about that? I'm not too sure where to take this conversation, I must be honest.
Yeah, I didn't look in the dictionary for this one. I think yesterday I over-prepared. So I under-prepared for this one and thought I'd just wing it. You didn't mention the key difference with Jasper, he's got hair. And I think you're right, we are all different, we're all unique. However, we tend to, I think, associate with people very similar to us. I mean, it's a pity Trevor's not here because even he could count the number of friends I have that smoke. I think it's one. So I tend not to identify with smokers. And I think as we get older, we tend to be involved less and less with people that are radically different from us, because we build our networks, we build our friendships, we build our business relationships with people like us. But yeah, I like to also be involved with people that are different from me, because I think then it adds more to the discussion, more to the pot. And I actively go out of my way to make friends that are different. I think I mentioned it before. Quite a few years ago, I bumped into someone at a social media training event, and she was a performance artist. And I think the best way to describe her is wacky. But I made a point, I don't know why, of becoming friends with her. And it led to a really good relationship. And actually, it led to, and I'm going to disturb my camera here, it led to me writing a little book. Because it's full of wacky stories, very similar to her wacky stories. So it had an advantage. But there are some people who are so different that I just refuse to associate with them, because you can't have any form of dialogue. I think, there are some things you can tolerate and you can perhaps avoid talking about. For example, in this country, there's some people that still believe in fox hunting, which I've never understood the rationale, the point, and I just refuse to have a conversation about fox hunting, but I still remain friends with them. My ex-business partner was pro-fox hunting. We just never discussed it. Otherwise, I think I'd have hit him. But I think if you can find ways to mix with people that are different, and also I think understand that most of the time, well, probably all the time, they hold views that make sense to their way of thinking. And if you can unpick that, maybe it can influence or even reaffirm your way of thinking. So I do try and understand why people are different and what makes it that way. And of course, we all had different upbringings. But I mean, what I find fascinating is that you can have two people that perhaps had abusive parents. One will turn out a kind, loving person, the other one a thug. And I find that fascinating, that the similar experience. And it's like my sister and I, we had reasonable parents. My parents smoked, And I think going back to the thing about actions speak louder than words, I copied them. I used to smoke, which is probably why I don't smoke like smokers now. But my sister never did. But we both had the same experiences, but we had different results. Yeah, that's my thoughts. It's that, yes, we are all different, but we choose to identify with people with similarities to us. And we tend to exclude people that have radically different views from us. And for some of them, it's really difficult to have that conversation, isn't it? And, you know, you get on to maybe, racists. How do you have a conversation around that without it falling apart? But then you look at other extreme views, like some of the people with conspiracy theories. You can perhaps understand why they have them, because it fulfills a need for them. And then you can perhaps feel a little bit more compassionate towards them, because you can see it comes from perhaps a position of weakness rather than a position of strength. I don't know, but yeah, generally speaking, I try and avoid people that are very similar to me when we have committees, when we have work teams, because why should I bring people onto that team that got the same skills as me? Why do I want people that are going to agree with me when I'm going to make a mistake? I want people that are going to disagree with me when I'm going to drop myself in it. So I like people that are different, but our natural thing is to surround ourselves with people the same. And there's a very interesting experiment that was done once. They put a bunch of engineers, a bunch of, I think it was solicitors, and a bunch of accountants in a room together. They weren't allowed to speak. And after you've been in there a little while, you had to just put your hand on someone's shoulders, and that was the person that you were going to pair up with. Every single accountant are paired up with an accountant. So we obviously have a body language. And I find that when I go to meetings, I will tend to sit next to an accountant, even though I don't know they're an accountant, and even though I've given up being an accountant. So we're naturally drawn to people that are the same as us. That's me finished, and I hope I rambled on long enough.
Yeah, no, thanks, Ed. Yeah, I think a lot of good points in there. You know, it is interesting, and I think the point that you make is, you know, you can always engage with somebody if they're prepared to listen, and if you're prepared to listen. And I think the challenge is people who hold very radical views aren't prepared to listen. They tend to be very set in their mindset, in their way of thinking, and anybody who disagrees with that is completely wrong. And I think that becomes the real challenge when you're trying to relate to those kinds of people, because there is no discussion. You know, it's a one-way discourse, and they write and that's, you know, you used the example of racism. I think that's you know, a very interesting topic, and especially in this country. You know, the meaning of the word seems to have been changed fairly radically, in my opinion. And maybe coming from a white man, that's one of the challenges with these things. But you know, it seems to be a unidirectional occurrence in this country. So, you know, you can only be racist if you're white. And you know, that's an interesting discussion. But you know, it's a difficult discussion to have with people in a group who have very strong feelings about it, because some people will just, as you say, get completely hot under the collar, and perhaps even worse, because it is so emotive, and I think that really becomes the challenge with trying to relate to people who are different on that kind of basis. You know, where it's a really radical view or a fixed view about something specific. So yeah, it can be an interesting challenge, but also like your example about, you know, getting on board with on boards with different people. I often quote the example of, you know, if you recruit a bunch of people that are the same as yourself, then all of them are superfluous except for one. So you've got to make the decision to surround yourself with some form of diversity, at least, so you can, as you say, get different inputs and different discussions and different challenges, which I think if everybody operates on a similar mode of being prepared to listen and discuss and interpret, you know, can only lead to positive results. So Jesper, You're the odd one out in this group this morning, so.
Yeah, aren't we all, eh? But I think, yeah, thanks for giving me a bit of a time to collect my thoughts, and it's always good to listen to you and Ed on the topic. Then it starts to open up possibilities. So I think the whole topic of relating to people, and I think the way Lee put it yesterday was, I'm not sure if she used it, but I thought that was what came up in me. How do you relate to people that you actually are totally different from? And I think you touched on it with some people that are so set on their views that there's actually no conversation. I think I would personally find that very hard. But if I go back to just the process of relating, it was something I had to learn many years ago, probably taking me back to 30, 40 years ago. And it was explained to me in a very simple thing. And first of all, if you can think of people going up in a lift, and there's nowadays with social distancing, it's getting more difficult to imagine that. But let's say it's a packed lift with 8 people in the lift. What is their body language? So they're not reaching out to each other and greeting and engage in conversation. They're all up in the air and trying to avoid eye contact. And with that image to say, this is how it's almost our base programming is to be, what's the word? I don't want to make contact. But and even if you go to, I remember in the early days when I go to some other public event, and there might be food on the table and drinks on the table, but people tend to stand all by themselves, and you feel very lonely. And how good do you feel when someone, a complete stranger, comes over to you and introduce himself and take a genuine interest in you? So the point that was made to me that stuck was, we all have this need to say, help me feel important. And how do you make people engage with you? So I learned it with the simple formula, and I have mentioned it before, but it's a simple formula called FORM, F-O-R-M. And that helped me to make conversation that doesn't matter in what crowd I find myself, but if it's complete strangers and I now need to keep conversation going for the next 15, 20 minutes, I would find out about your family, F for family. And so this is where we can all connect. Everybody, even that radical person, has got family. And by engaging him on, so are you married? Have you got kids? So what does your wife do? You know, and kids, you know, that, and especially once you become a granddad, like in my case, you just need to open that topic, and out comes my camera and we start talking grandkids and stuff like that. So family is a good connector. The O stands for occupation. So because I'm fairly task focused, I often lead with that. So what do you do for a living? And then once I find out what you do for a living, I also then follow it up with, so how long have you been doing it? Because often people change careers, and what they do now is not the interesting fact, but what they did before is the interesting fact. And in a very short space of time, you get a picture of a person in terms of just all the jobs that he did or the careers that he engaged in. And you know, you do that for the wife and whoever else is involved in his life. The R then, if I then by that time run out of conversation, the R stands for recreation or fun. So, you know, it could be, if the guy's big and bulky, I would say, so do you work out, or were you a rugby player on your days, or what do you do for fun? And once you get his passion, and it could be golf, it could be whatever is his passion, or cycling, whatever, that can keep the conversation going. And then the last one is M for motivation. So what really motivates you? And often you are surprised to what motivates a guy doesn't have much bearing on what he's doing currently in his career or his job. But so just those few things, and I call it that we can all connect with each other on what is common to all of us. So I use that FORM to say what can we connect on, what is common to us. But then the reality is we're all completely different. So you put two people together, you've got two different worlds, so to speak, coming together. And I call that the spice. And it would be a very boring world if we were all the same, because then we're not adding value to each other, but it's that difference that then becomes the spice. And it's often the difference can be initially, it can almost offend you, and it can grate you because it's so different from who you are. But then sometimes over time, that person grows on you, and some of his values rubs off on you. But that's the growth that we all experience, that we learn how to communicate with people totally different from us. And then I think we relate to people out of necessity. So if my car breaks down, I have to get to a mechanic, and then I have to be friendly to the mechanic so he doesn't mess up my car. And I'm so things like that. So that out of necessity is, what do we consider our scarce resources, which then directs the flow of our relationships. So if I need money, I will start meeting with people who could lead me to people who could give me money, or jobs, or whatever the resources are. So that almost comes from the whole survival thing. So I think if one really wants to make a debate about that, if you bring in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it will often have a direct bearing on the kind of, where are you now and what kind of relationships do you have? But then I think in concluding my contribution to this whole topic of relating, I think it also depends on the person that you're relating to. Is that person already whole? And what I mean by whole is he comfortable in his own skin? Has he already developed his identity? And therefore, if he now shares his passion with you and stuff like that, he adds value to you, but whether you agree with him or not is not going to change him, and vice versa. So I think it's easy to relate to whole people, but then unfortunately there are not many of them. And most of people are what I call empty. So there are aspects of their identity that has not yet been developed, and they actually need other people to make them feel good about themselves. They need other people to motivate them to feel enthusiastic and stuff like that. And when you try to relate to these people, it's a futile exercise, because all they will do, they will drain you. They won't add value to you. And if you yourself are empty and you need to feel important, you can easily get sucked into these kind of relationships, because you are led to believe initially that they need you and you're adding value, but it's actually not a wholesome relationship. Yeah, so I think those are some of the topics or the components of relationship that I can throw out.
Sure, thanks, Jasper. The psychologist, psychiatrist, and philosopher all bundled into one there, I think. So, yeah, I think some really great points there, and interesting ones, because yeah, I agree. You know, I think we often do get trapped into these conversations with those people, as you say, as you describe, as not being whole, and it tends to be a very one-way exercise, doesn't it? It's they continually looking for validation of their ideas and their personalities and their ways and their means, and tend to just rattle on, and it can become very draining. So the question for me would be, you know, do you just simply disengage from that? Do you walk away? Is there a nice way to do it? Is there a nasty way to do it? There's obviously a nasty way to do it, but you know, how does one deal with that if you're correct in saying, you know, a lot of people are like that? Where does that sort of leave us in the greater scheme of things?
Can I just come in there?
Mm.
It's quite interesting actually, because a friend of mine talks about drains and radiators, and drains are people that kind of, like Jasper was saying, just suck stuff out of you and don't give back, whereas radiators are ones that perhaps are whole people and just enrich you, I suppose, because they're giving out all the time. I was just thinking though, perhaps Jasper, most of your friends are male, because when I talk to women and say, do you play rugby, it doesn't go down very well. Although I do know some women rugby players, and actually one or two in Cornwall. There's a ladies American football team as well, which is quite interesting. But yeah, and another good friend of mine says that you should actually cull your friends from time to time. Look around at your friends, look at those that aren't adding value, and it's not a cynical way. It's ones, by that he means which are good relationships, and then just let the other ones wither on the vine. But I do think sometimes even people that you don't think are sort of have much to bring to the party, when you start digging deep, you then discover hidden talents. I was interested about this thing about talking and people not wanting to make contact in that lift. I used to commute to London from Sussex, so about a journey of about 50 miles on the train every day. And we very seldom talk to each other, you know, we just read our newspapers or whatever. And then one day the train got stuck in a snowdrift and we were there for hours. And there was almost this party spirit. Everyone was chatting away and it was great and lovely. But the following morning, we went back to the same thing. And I think you're right. You know, people, our initial thing is not to communicate, not to engage. Yes, I've jotted down your form, Jasper, so I shall use that, except for rugby and ladies.
Well, I've got a niece who is a very good rugby player as well. So you do get that, but probably the exception rather than the rule. Although I must admit, these days the roles of male and female seem to be getting rather twisted in this modern world. I'm not too sure which way we're heading with this strange creation called humanity. It's a bit of an odd evolution process that we're going through, but it becomes interesting, doesn't it? What I say, the challenge for me is when interesting becomes boring. Yeah, I mean, you can spend a lot of time being interested in somebody else's life and process using Jasper's mechanism, which he's told to me before, and I think it's a great mechanism. But that can become a very one-way discussion, can't it, Jasper? I mean, if you're the one just simply asking the questions and getting the feedback, and you don't get that reciprocal engagement and interest from that person, it's that person walks away feeling great because they've spoken about themselves and their lives and their interests and their whatever it is. But you've actually, you've got to know them, but you haven't been afforded the reciprocal opportunity to explain, who you are and what you do. In some cases, I mean, obviously, in some cases, it does work both ways. But
no, I think you're quite right, and that technique is not for you to be served by that conversation, but that technique is for you to almost very quickly scan the person in front of you to say, is there any areas of connection here that might be worth my while to pursue? And then obviously when I see areas of connection that I can pursue, then I would start dropping that to say, hey, you're just like me. We've also that thing, or I worked at that company, or I pursue this interest, and then to see where that leads you. But yes, it is pretty much in the beginning, I did it too robotically, and people picked up that it was me just interrogating them, and they didn't actually feel the value of it. But with a few tweaks, it's amazing how quickly people open up to you because you take a genuine interest in them, and because I'm very interested in the various jobs and careers out there. The more that I learn about what, let's say, electricians are doing, I find out they've got a world of their own. And with every successive conversation, I can add more value to the conversation, and the people feel more and more that, hey, I'm one of them. So I think to the degree that you can make a person feel, hey, you like me, that starts opening up people for conversation. But coming back to your early, your question that you posed to us, what happens if you find yourself in a conversation that's just going nowhere? And I must say, as I get older, I feel less and less worried about what you think of me. And so when I'm in a conversation that I can quickly see, listen, this is not, we have no further future. I just try and disengage myself, even if I have to. And nowadays it's not really a lie, but I always say, listen, I have to get to a next meeting. So whether that meeting is with Rich to have a glass of Coke or whatever, it's I disengage with that kind of thing. So I'm probably rude sometimes, but I also don't want to stay in stuff just for the sake of courtesy.
Great, thanks guys, and yeah, look, it's almost bottom of the hour. So yes, but I'm sorry, I have to disengage now because I've got to go to the next meeting. And no, but I think it's been a great discussion with some great inputs and ideas. So it's amazing what we can do just with the three of us, and hopefully next week we'll kick off with a few more bodies. Always makes the conversation interesting when you get a few more. So I haven't thought at all about a topic for Monday. So if either of you have got a suggestion, maybe we can pick up on that. If not, I'll give it some time.
Yesterday we talked about that thing about the line you're not prepared to cross. I wonder if we could pick up on that, or whether we wanted to leave that for later on.
No, I think that's a great one. And in fact, it's interesting because I had some additional thoughts on that as well after that discussion yesterday. So yeah, let's do that. Where is that line? What is that line? How do you identify it? Yeah, so let's pick up on that. So we'll draw the battle lines. What are the lines for Monday? And other than that, have a great weekend, and we'll see you guys then. Thanks so much for the chat.
See you next week.